Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Pugh of the Home Bible College. It is February the 6th, and we're taking a look at the first few chapters of the book of Leviticus. In today's Bible reading, we will look at the first few chapters, and the title for this book could be called The Worship of Jehovah. Now, in our introduction to the books of the Bible, we'll talk about this book in more depth. But in this first section of Leviticus, the Lord gives to Moses instructions on the 5 offerings. Now, there were 5 offerings that the children of Israel could bring before the Lord. There was the burnt offering, the meal offering. Now, in the Authorized Version, it's called the meat offering, but that is, I think, a mistake. It should be a meal offering, because ask any cook what meal is and they will tell you that it's flour. And then we have the peace offering, the sin offering, and the trespass offering. Now today we'll look at the first 3. The first offering was the burnt offering. It was an offering of total devotion because it was totally burnt up. It was an offering made by fire. Now it could be from the cattle, from the herd, or from the flock. And it was a voluntary offering. It was an offering of a male without blemish. All of these offerings have something to say about the life and work of Christ. The offering was burnt on the altar with timber as the starter, and the blood was sprinkled around the altar. The offering was a sweet savour to the Lord. This offering spoke of Christ's redemptive work on the cross that was completely for the benefit of the Father's pleasure. Now, there was an aspect of what Christ accomplished, you see, that was wholly for God, and men have no participation in it at all. The second offering was the meal offering, not the meat offering. This was an offering made from fine flour, oil, and frankincense. Then the priest will take a handful and burn it on the altar. The meal that was left over was for the priest to eat. It was a very holy thing. Sometimes the offerer would bring a meal offering baked. Sorry, I've got a mistake there. Sometimes the offerer would bring a meal offering baked in the oven. It was made out of unleavened cakes made of fine flour and oil. A third way of preparing this offering was meal baked in a pan, a bit like a pancake. Again, this was fine flour mixed with oil and baked. Lastly, the offering could be the same ingredients but baked in a frying pan. The offering was brought to the priests and it was burnt on the altar. It was an offering of a sweet smell. What was left could be eaten by the priests, but this food was very special only for the priests to eat. All these offerings had no yeast and no honey in them. Now, obviously, yeast and honey would change the offering and make it unsuitable. All these offerings were seasoned with salt. This offering speaks of the work of Christ, who, like a crop of wheat, was cut down in his prime, crushed under the stone to produce very fine flour, and mixed with oil, which is symbolic of the spiritual life. The bread is baked either in an oven or on a frying pan, and this heat produces something that is nourishment to men. Another key ingredient is frankincense, which is a beautiful fragrance and burns with a bright white light. How picturesque when applied to Christ. He was cut down in his prime, crushed, and he was put into the heat of the furnace of suffering, and yet he had the most beautiful light even in the midst of suffering. There's nothing of yeast in it because yeast has the idea of corruption, and there can be no corruption associated with Christ. The priests were able to eat this food, and in doing so were partakers of something that feeds the souls of men. Now the peace offering was an offering from the herd. It could be male or female, as long as it was without blemish. It was killed at the door of the tabernacle, and the blood was sprinkled around the altar. It was an offering made by fire to the Lord. It was specified that the blood and fat were never eaten by Israel through all their generations. This offering spoke of the peace that is brought about by the redemptive work of Christ. All of the first three offerings described here are sweet savour offerings. The other two were not a sweet savour. From these three offerings we see that Christ firstly died for God. His life and death was a sweet savour to him alone. Secondly, we see that Christ grew in the earth and was cut down and crushed and baked in the heat, and in this way he is food to men. And lastly, we see that Christ is an offering that brings peace to men. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I fully understand all of this. There is a great deal of typological significance. Now, a type is a particular Hebrew way of thinking, whereby, we all understand what a allegory is. We all understand what a parable is. A parable is an allegory in the past tense, which is placed alongside truth to illustrate it. Now, a type is an object that is put aside truth in order to illustrate it. And these offerings were objects, but they tell us something about the redemptive work of Christ. Now, my password's in verse 2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, if any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, he shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd, and of the flock. So this book of Leviticus, is the handbook for the priests of Israel. It's not something that we would ever use today as Christians, because it's something that was unique to the priesthood. Only they offered the sacrifices of the Lord. So how interesting, isn't it? You see, the Bible is not just about being a Christian. The Bible is a book which encompasses the whole of time and the whole of God's dealings with men. And on this particular occasion, he's giving instructions to the people of Israel, how they should approach the Lord and how they should make their sacrifices. Well, God bless you. I look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow. Have a great day, and I wish you every blessing. Bye for now.